Well, if you actually been to China or just randomly come across any China clips on TikTok, you've probably been struck by those fast-speed metro trains, those colorful neon lights, the ultra-saturated skyscrapers, and the raw cyberpunk vibe. You might be like, wow, they feel so fresh and so exotic. But for a lot of Chinese themselves, some of that scenery is just straight up ugly. These visual disasters include, but not limited to, the abuse of this high saturation red color, those tomato and neck stir-fried color shop signs, these cheap-ass China chic-style take-out packaging designs, fully sealed security bars on every window, and a colorful LED outline for sound to Asian buildings, etc. From the minimalism and the restrained aesthetic admired in the Song and Ming dynasties to this, what exactly happened to Chinese aesthetics? I would say bigger is better, and as long as it works, pretty much sums Chinese aesthetics today. Bigger is better is for the bosses. It's a way to show where the budget went, a kind of performance of effort for those in power. As long as it works, on the other hand, is for ordinary people. People don't ask for much, and since aesthetics don't put food on the table, why bother making things harder than they need to be? If it works, it works. These two ideas might seem contradictory, but they are actually two sides of the same coin. Even though there's a global stereotype that Chinese are good at math, but when it comes to aesthetics, the people make decisions seem completely incapable of doing simple subtraction. And this shows up everywhere. At its core, subtraction and leaving things blank can be seen as laziness. And addition is safer and easier to quantify as performance. Take something as small as the phone you use every day. A product manager seems to have some kind of phobia. In their mind, if there's any unused space on the screen, that's a fucking waste of traffic. So it has to be filled. Always with a bouncing Chinese red envelope or a flashing notification dot. This kind of visual noise comes from a fear of missing out or getting less than others. If my competitors have a feature, we need it too. If they don't have certain elements, we will add them anyway. This obsession with being all in one makes aesthetics completely mean shit in the face of conversion rates. Another typical example is urban landscaping. We all know that a large cherry blossom graph can be this beautiful, right? But Chinese decision makers who are obsessed with bigger is better will begin asking themselves, wait, is only having cherry blossoms too boring? And what happens after spring? What if it doesn't look good in other seasons? So in the name of being rich and comprehensive, they start throwing in all kinds of different flowers to make sure there's always something to see all year round. They'll force in peach trees and crab apples into cherry graph and plant osmanthus and camphor trees in the background to reach this harmony. They would rather have something that's consistently made all year round than allow it to be breathtaking, even for a single minute. Beyond ancient Chinese tradition of pragmatism, the influence of Soviet aesthetics has been massive. The Soviet approach, which you could call a kind of brutal functionalism, was largely rooted in the severe weakness of slight industry and a wartime mindset and a system that prioritized heavy industry. Resources were directed first toward tanks and rockets or something like that. That's why everyday items, bowls, clothes, housing, as long as they met basic functional standards, that was enough. In the context that prioritizes struggle and survival, talking about aesthetics can come across as too fancy and bougie, which needs to be suppressed. That's the reason why when these Chinese pragmatists reject improving aesthetics, they often do it with a strange sense of moral superiority. We don't need that. Well, to some extent, this has reinforced a deep-rooted obsession with pragmatism. If something isn't directly tied to measurable outcomes or performance, then as long as it works, it's good enough. If you say something isn't that aesthetically pleasing, they will always tell you, it works, doesn't it? Be grateful, what more do you want? So even today, you will see a mainstream line or argument that treats the pursuit of beauty as something opposed to basic survival. The moment you bring up this topic of improving a fucking aesthetic standards, they will respond with, we only just got enough to eat. Talk about the decline of literature or the arts, they will ask why we should spend time and money on that. What's the point if people can even afford food? You will keep hearing this preaching. Fix the economy first. Aesthetics don't matter. Prioritize STEM. Humanities and the arts not important. What they don't realize is that once you strip away beauty and individuality, people start to become a product of assembly line or simply workhorses in a factory. Essentially, it's a form of human alienation. As long as words is at core a kind of laziness on the part of designers, it comes from not really treating people as human beings with aesthetic needs, and from the quiet assumption that people don't really care about that much about aesthetics anyway. People in return often don't even realize they could demand something more beautiful, aka the right to beauty. They may not even have a clear sense of what ugly is in the first place. Their understanding of beauty has been shaped and conditioned over time to the point where they don't even see it as something they can pursue and optimize. That's why you keep seeing all these ugly, standardized templates everywhere. It's almost sick to two-way relationship between lazy designers and unaware consumers is a vicious cycle. As for why they have no concept of beauty in the first place, I'll get into that in part 4. In fact, if a designer was simply cutting corners on purpose and going with it as long as it works, the problem wouldn't even be this serious. But what makes it more absurd is that in many cases, people actually put in huge freaking effort, spend large budgets, and still end up producing what can only be described as visual industry vomit. So why does that happen? The current generation of decision makers, the bosses and managers, the old-timers, mostly grew up in an era of extreme material scarcity. Deep down, there's often an association between beauty and things like more, brighter, bigger, more colorful. In that mindset, something only feels worthy if it looks big and full. This is why you see information overloaded billboards, overly saturated colors, neon signs everywhere, and those flashy fake European luxury interiors that try very hard to look expensive, like hotel lobbies dripping in fake gold, or some rural self-built houses with randomly placed Roman columns. Visually, it's all driven by a kind of urgency to break up with the past. This kind of a new rich aesthetic is essentially overcompensation for past poverty. In particular, the widespread use of fake European-style urban design and decoration can be seen as a kind of aesthetic borrowing, because there's no established internal definition of taste. People have to borrow external symbols of status that have been widely accepted. Mostly, this kind of Western aristocratic elements. The more someone lacks something, the more they tend to be obsessed with accumulation. This comes from a kind of a scarcity memory almost written into behavior. When someone has lived through long-term deprivation, the only version of beauty they can easily recognize is more and more visible. And this will make many end up looking down upon those who invest time in subjection or minimalism. Of course, decision makers in position of power don't just influence themselves. They shape entire generations through the education system. And this has led to a system break in aesthetic education. For a long time, China's social evaluation system has focused almost entirely on grades and efficiency. Aesthetic education has often been seen as something like a form of accessory because it doesn't translate into measurable scores. The status of creative subjects like art and handicrafts within the education system is so low that there are very few students in China who go through school without their art classes being constantly hijacked by course subjects like math, Chinese, or English. So as a result, most people never receive any systematic training in things like proportion, color, or negative space, let alone the ability to create or appreciate beauty. Even when universities do offer related courses, the idea that this doesn't matter is already deeply internalized during compulsory education. By the time people in our 20s are looking for jobs, it's unrealistic to expect them to suddenly develop an interest in aesthetics out of nowhere. And even if someone is generally interested in art or design, unless they want to apply to an art school, investing too much time in it is often seen as goofing around or even a waste of effort. Okay, so even if you personally develop a sense of aesthetics through your own interests, the biggest issue isn't that no one in China has taste, it's that the people who do have it ain't the one deciding what actually looks good. In China's public discourse, the idea of valuing STEM over humanity is never ending saga. Those in science, technology, and engineering often hold real power, and there's a widespread belief that only these fields can bring real, tangible progress. This utilitarian obsession with efficiency creates low input, high return mentality in everything. As a result, anything that requires long-term investment tends to be dismissed, and feels like humanity and arts, where results are harder to quantify, are often the ones being looked down upon. What people in literature and arts actually contribute to society has long been questioned. As we all know, STEM is built around standards, parameters, and conversion rates. Aesthetics, on the other hand, is hard to quantify because it's vague and subjective. As we mentioned, in a system that only rewards measurable results, anything that can be quantified is seen as something with low return. And that makes decision makers instinctively reject aesthetics like fucking trouble. That's why people with technical backgrounds often end up in leadership positions, which creates this match, especially in design, where non-experts are making decisions for experts, and you end up with all kinds of bizarre, stitched together visual disasters. But no matter how toxic a leader taste is, no matter how much it makes designers cringe to death, and no matter how absurd it is to go through 100 revisions only to end up picking the first version, most people won't bother to push back. It's just not worth the effort. And so this kind of top-down, one-size-fits-all aesthetic control just keeps getting passed down, and they replicate everywhere. This systematic neglect of Chinese aesthetic education leads to weak creativity, which means a lot of people can only rely on imitation and being a copycat. Ironically, this kind of patching things together is exactly the essence of AI. So the rise of AI accelerating the collapse of already weak sense of copyright, making it easier than ever for some talentless people to steal and feel their own sense of validation and vanity. The rise of AI has only made an already overconfident Chinese boomer sense of taste even worse. Before, their creations were ugly, but they could at least be called works. Now, it's more like a disturbing stitched-together Frankenstein. Over the past few decades, Chinese economic growth has largely been driven by speed. Big shout out to that. But design, on the other hand, is seen as a slow variable, something that takes time to refine, which makes it naturally an enemy of fast returns. If looking good doesn't directly translate into making more money, and having taste doesn't make it sexy easier, then the future where most people simply won't invest in aesthetics is inevitable. That's why copying is so common, and why so few Chinese companies are willing to spend money on original design or real development. This kind of opportunism has built an entire business logic around fast replication through imitation, where what goes viral today can end up in a random EU factory production line the very next day. And it works over and over again. So in the pursuit of this fast replication, efficiency, and cost cutting, managers across whole China have quickly and almost collectively embraced AI overnight, like getting a fucking gift from Santa. From AI-generated visual effects at the CNY Gala to these company boomer bosses becoming obsessed with AI, with some even measuring performance by token usage. Because AI lowers the barrier to producing visuals, it also accelerates a kind of bad drafts out good situation, which has led the entire graphic design industry being wiped out overnight. And even the film industry, especially anything involving real actors, has been shaken up by the rise of AI short dramas. So you can walk through any city and suddenly see flooded AI-generated designs, ads, and visuals everywhere, often with obvious lighting mistakes or broken human anatomy. No one really cares the audience likes it or not. As long as it saves time, effort, and money, then it's correct. And since the audience has no taste to speak of, they just see whatever they're fed. The mainstream narrative often claims that AI is extremely powerful and even beneficial to aesthetic education. But most people in the industry probably understand that the foundation of today's AI system is, to a large extent, built on copyright infringement. Especially it's run by feeding models with human labor and the creative work of countless illustrators and artists. As the saying goes, you don't feel the pain until it happens to you. What's even more horrifying is that art academies in China are also actively embracing AI, offering courses like AI integrated Chinese opera or AI assisted aesthetic education, shit like that. Even student training now involves using AI generated works as references for imitation. At this point, if AI were able to teach classes, maybe teachers would just go home early. So all in all, what you get is a vicious cycle. In a system that doesn't value aesthetic education, people have no real sense of taste. So anything slightly designed can still literally sell, which in return numbs people's taste and gave designers even less incentive to care about aesthetics. The rise of AI only accelerates the soup, and it's the elimination of aesthetics by efficiency and opportunism. When pragmatism and utilitarian think domain, everyone is pushed towards them because technical skills can make money and measurable economic value for GDP. And even in spirituality, people only worship what they think is useful, like God or wealth. In such an environment, humanity and arts that don't directly make money or visible results are naturally pushed aside. When most of the content out there becomes this kind of soulless AI-generated material, the baseline for the next Chinese generation's sense of aesthetics will be dragged down to hell. The idea that people have gotten used to eating trash, so it's fine to keep feeding them trash, is already disturbing. But what's worse is that they forget what real food even tastes like.